Hello there. This is a presentation in the realm of astrolocality where I want to look at declination as an important factor to consider that most astrologers and folks trying to do it themselves don't even look at. So let's see what our agenda is. I'm going to talk about what declination is, why we use it, some astronomy that we're going to look at, including geographic latitude and what the relationship is between declination and latitude. We're going to work with what's called declination multiples when we look at a chart and we're trying to determine which planets are being emphasized strength-wise with these multiples, which we'll talk about. And then I have some case studies, which are kind of interesting to look at what happened to these folks when they moved to a particular location, and then we'll wrap up. So first, let's briefly describe how astrocartography works. Basically, everyone's familiar with an astral map that is created based on the natal birth positions of the planets. Most importantly, what we're looking at are planets that are in angular positions on the map, which means basically your midheaven, your ascendant, your descendant, your IC, those are projected onto the map when you're born. And say you have Venus in the first house conjunct the ascendant, that would be an angle, because the other angles we look at from a house standpoint are first, fourth, seventh, and 10th, which correspond to what we just talked about. So you could have a Venus on the ascendant when you're born, and that would make for a pretty powerful Venus in terms of its location. But then you can move a couple 100 miles away, 300 miles away, and Venus is no longer at the ascendant. It has moved. Maybe it's in the second house now, or maybe it's in the 12th house. What it's done is it's changed the accidental dignity of the planet, and it basically changes kind of your experience of that planet in that particular location. So, accidental dignities are critically important to the work of astrocartography. So we want to keep that in mind as we study how declinations can work, which are totally different than what we're looking at when we're looking at an astromap or astrocartography. So here is an example of an astrocartography map. And as I said, you'll look at the yellow line here would mark the ascendant or the descendant, because it will show up either here as a conjunction or an opposition as these lines map across, move across the map. These red lines that come down and up are also related to the midheaven or the IC, and it would be shown as the sun conjunct for the midheaven or sun opposition for the IC. So this is what we typically are familiar with when we're looking at astrocartography. And as I said, it's an accidental dignity. So if you move, it is going to change these lines very quickly. Just so you get an idea of how fast they would change, each line changes 1 degree every 4 minutes, approximately every 4 minutes, and it would go into a totally different sign in about 2 hours. And then you got to understand that there's mileage attached to these degrees, and if you were to change the latitude by a degree, that would be 69 miles. Longitude would be 69 miles at the equator, but then it changes, it gets smaller as you move towards the poles. But I wanted to also talk about essential dignities. So we talked about accidental dignities that we deal with in astrocartography. When we look at essential dignities, this comes from a study of astrology, typically from the Hellenistic time and in the medieval times, where we study the quality of the planets based on their signs. And it's very important because essential dignities will not change when you move. They will be with you no matter where you are. And these signs can be helpful. They can be unhelpful. They can be challenging. So all these things just never change. And we got to keep that in mind whenever we're dealing with an astrolocation, a relocation. So I'm giving here an example of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's chart to show you what the essential dignities are within his chart. So in a day chart, which means the sun is above the horizon, this is the horizon, the ascendant and the descendant that move across. When the sun is above the horizon, it's considered a day chart. And when you have a day chart, you have a benefic that is in favor of the day chart, in this case, which is Jupiter. If it was a night chart where the sun would be below the horizon, it would be Venus, would be the preferred benefic, or the stronger benefic in the chart. The other malefic that we look at, there's believe it or not, a favored malefic in a day chart is Saturn. In a night chart, it's Mars. So what we would find in a day chart is Mars would be the harder malefic to deal with. So whatever Mars is doing in that chart, that's going to be a challenge for somebody born during the day. And whatever Saturn is doing in the chart would be a challenge for anybody born at night. The other thing is we look at the planets in terms of their position within the signs. So in this case, he has a challenging Mars to begin with because it's the unfavored malefic. But then it's in the sign of Taurus. And the sign of Taurus is considered in its detriment. The reason why is because in traditional astrology, Mars rules Scorpio. So we have now Mars in its opposite side of Taurus. Mars wants to dive deep into Scorpio with all kinds of intense energy. When it's in Taurus, it doesn't really know what to do with itself. It's a little bit like trying to steer the car or run the car with the brakes on at times, because it's a material sign that's very grounded to the earth, where Mars really wants to cut through things. So we have that challenge with Mars there. We also have his Saturn, which is a favored malefic, but it's in a sign that's opposite its rulership. So Saturn in Cancer is opposite Saturn in Capricorn. So it's not as operative as we really want it to be. Saturn in Capricorn is very material. It's very aspirational in terms of getting things done. And in Cancer, it gets a little bit mushy with the watery nature of Cancer. So that's considered to be in detriment as well. We do have an accidental dignity if JFK's chart was correct, time was correct, because you can see here it's conjunct the midheaven. So that's going to give it more dignity. Unfortunately, JFK's chart is estimated time is 3 o'clock in the afternoon from memory. All right, we're going to do a little bit of astronomy here to be able to explain what declination is. So consider this Astronomy 101, very introductory. What we have here are these measurements. We have the ecliptic, which is the path of the sun as it appears from Earth. And it goes around the Earth like this. It's an oval. Because the Earth is on its tilt, it changes as it goes around during the seasons. You have here an intersection between the ecliptic and what's called the celestial equator. And the celestial equator is a projection of the Earth's equator into the sky. So you can see here's the Earth's equator, and here's the celestial equator as it goes around. So we have the celestial equator, we've got the ecliptic, and this is the ecliptic celestial equator. Then what we have is something called right ascension, which is not used very often by astrologers, but basically it's looking at longitude that's projected into the sky. So here's the vernal equinox, and you would measure it over here to the right. That would be a measurement of right ascension. But what we're concerned about here is declination. And what declination is a north-south measurement to the celestial equator. Here's the celestial equator. This is giving you a view into the north of the celestial equator. So in this case, I guess it's supposed to be a planet that's so much north of the celestial equator, and we call that declination. But we also call declination what goes south of the celestial equator, and we'll get into those particulars in the upcoming slides. But here's just a basic view of the astronomy that helps us understand declination. Okay, so what we're gonna look at here is a visualization of declination using John Fitzgerald Kennedy's chart. What we need to look at here is the green line, which is the ecliptic, what we just talked about, and its relationship to the red line, which is the celestial equator. So all the planets up here are north of the celestial equator, and the planets down here are south of the celestial equator. This is important when we're looking at parallels of declination, which I'll get into in a second. But if we want to look here, Venus is at the highest point of the declination from the celestial equator. And you can see here on the right, it says Venus is at 23 north 07. What we consider to be in bounds for a planet would be under 23.5 degrees of declination. Sometimes you're going to see a planet like the moon go more than 23.5 degrees, and we would call it out of bounds, meaning it's not leashed to this particular ecliptic path and has its own independence, which is interesting to watch in certain people's lives. In this case, he has no planets that are out of bounds. He has Venus at its highest at 23 north 07. And then the planet he has the most to the south is Uranus at 14 south 18 minutes. So when we look at this, we are looking also for what we call parallels or contraparallels. And what those are like are conjunctions and oppositions. So if we have a planet within 1 degree of the same declination in the same hemisphere, that would be considered a parallel. Like in his case, he's got the Sun and Saturn considered in parallel. And you can see the Sun is at 20 north 38 minutes, and Saturn is at 21 north 6 minutes. So that would be considered a parallel, and it would give a sense of conjunction between the Sun and Saturn in the chart. I'm looking here. I don't think we had a contraparallel. Oh, yes, we do. We have Mercury and Uranus are in a contraparallel. And Mercury at 1424, Uranus at 1418. So Mercury is north, in the north position at same declination degree. It's just opposite where Uranus is. So that's important to understand, and that would be considered like an opposition in the chart. So we keep that in mind whenever we're trying to interpret a chart. And again, a lot of astrologers don't even think about parallels and contraparallels in terms of declination and how it affects the chart. So here I'm going to look at an example of JFK's chart, looking at the declination. Okay, so here is, we talked about longitude. That really tells us what the degrees of the planet are within the signs and minutes. Everybody's familiar with working with longitude, and that's a given. Declinations, though, are new, so I've got them out here, and we can kind of look at a few things. So we said Sun and Saturn are parallel. So here's the Sun at 20 north 38, and here's Saturn at 21 north 06. They're within a 1 degree orb. We have Mercury and Uranus that we talked about, 14 north 24 versus 14 south 18. So there's the contraparallel. Now, here's the problem. We have John F. Kennedy at a 3 p.m. time, and it's supposedly from memory. Well, I would never do an astrocartography chart using a time like that. There's just too much variance between what is estimated and what may be accurate. We just don't know. So how do we solve that problem if we're going to try to help somebody with relocation, but we don't have a good time? So here is how we do it. And I picked this up from some Vedic astrologer that I worked with at one time. And I guess it's not limited to Vedic astrology. It's other people I've seen that are using it. So here is the rules that we're going to use when we analyze this. The first rule is when the declination degree matches the geographic latitude degree, that's looking at the Earth, then that planet is given more power, or in essence, increased accidental dignity. So we'll look at some examples on that. Now, here's a weird one, though. It says it doesn't matter if the declination is north or south of the celestial equator, as long as the orb of the match is less than 2 degrees. So if we have a latitude of 24 degrees, and you've got 24 degrees north, and we've got a planet that's at 24 degrees south, it's a match, and we would consider it that way. We would not consider it as an opposition or a conjunction as we do with parallels and contraparallels. The next rule is even stranger, but it works. It doesn't matter if the declination degree is a fraction of the latitude, as long as the orb is maintained. So in this case, we could say 8 degrees of declination matches 24 degrees of latitude, because 8 times 3 is 24 degrees. And if it's within the 2 degrees, so let's say it was the latitude was 26 degrees, so it would be 24 versus 26. It's still within a 2-degree orb. So that's going to work. So in the JFK example, he was born at 42 North 20 in Massachusetts, and his sun is at 21 North 38. In declination, and Saturn is at 21 North 06. So both of those would be considered a match from the declination to the latitude. And that makes those planets stronger, at least where he lives. It actually, it's not going to totally go away if he moves, but it's important to know that. But now let's see what happens when you change your location. And here I have the chart for John F. Kennedy in Dallas, Texas, relocated to Dallas, Texas. Then we'll look at the transits. But basically, I've relocated it to Dallas, Texas, because that's where he was assassinated. And we'll take a little deeper dive on this where we're looking. So Dallas is at 3247 north, 32 degrees and 47 minutes. And the Sun and Saturn are not as strong in this natal chart. They're no longer matching. The declination is no longer matching the Dallas latitude of 32 North 47. So the declinations, they don't change. They stay the same no matter where you live. So they will emphasize or de-emphasize a certain planet based on the new latitude location where they're at. Now, in his case here, Mars is now in a match with the declination. So at 1704, 17 degrees north 4 minutes, it is a match up there with the 3247 latitude. And so it's within the 2 degree orb. Jupiter, which is, you would think, oh, well, Jupiter's at 17 degrees. Well, it's at 17 degrees 44 minutes, and it's just outside the orb. It's not quite there. So now we have John F. Kennedy's change, emphasizing more of Mars, de-emphasizing Sun and Saturn. And let's see kind of, what happens here when he's in Dallas at that pivotal time. We're looking now at the transit chart for Dallas on November 22nd, 1963 at 12:30 p.m. when the President, John F. Kennedy, was shot and assassinated. So I want to look at the aspects that were forming that day against his natal chart as actually the relocated natal chart. And of course, without the birth time, the actual house positions are suspect. So I'm not going to talk about the ascendant or the midheaven here. The first thing we want to look at, though, is this incredible tight square between transiting Saturn, square Mars, his natal Mars, in detriment. That's only a few minutes orb away from it. So you got, actually, it's about a degree, but it's still a very tight square. And then you have that Mars opposing transiting Neptune. So what it forms is a T-square. So you got Mars, Neptune, and it doesn't look totally square here because the planet positions in these house cups as they're drawn up. But you have this opposition of natal Mars transiting Neptune with transiting Saturn at the apex of this T-square. That's a lot of energy. That's a lot of dynamic energy, and it could very well produce um, a terrific amount of frustration as well as deception that we see with the whole conspiracy movement on the assassination. Also of note is we have transiting Uranus and Pluto opposing Chiron, transiting Chiron. So you've got this opposition between the transiting Chiron, Uranus, and Pluto. And both of those are squaring Sun, the Sun at 7 Gemini, and the life force, and transiting Mercury. So we have a T square that's not T square. I always confuse them. Grand square that's involving Uranus and Pluto, Chiron, which is known as the wounded healer, the pain that never really goes away, and you have Sun with Mercury. So this is a grand cross and a T square all within the assassination chart. Transiting Mars is, transiting Mars here is co-present with that Mercury, so it is wrapped up into this grand square. So that Mars is still heavily involved in the assassination. All right, now we're looking at JFK's solar arc chart, and I need to explain what that is for people that don't know. Typically, when we talk about progressions, we're looking at secondary progressions. And secondary progressions are where we look at the ephemeris, which lists all the planets' positions by day in a long period of time. And we treat the birth chart as progressing a year based on the next day in the ephemeris. So the next day of the ephemeris, which would be May 30th, the day after Kennedy was born, you'd see his natal sun move from 7 degrees Gemini to 8 degrees Gemini. And that's the same thing in solar arc. You'll see a move of 1 degree for the sun every year. But in the secondary progression, you see the other planets based on their speed and direction, they will not move necessarily a degree a year. For instance, you could see Pluto here at 3 degrees Cancer. It could be in 3 degrees Cancer the entire month and not shift into another degree. So that's what a secondary progression does. In a solar arc progression, like I said, the sun will move a degree, but also Venus will move a degree, Pluto will move a degree, Saturn, they all rotate. So when you look at the solar arc chart, the configuration, like this Mars, Mercury, Jupiter configuration here, is the same as this Mars, Mercury, Jupiter configuration in the natal chart. So they all move in concert with their positions throughout your life. So it's when people look at secondary progressions, usually the fastest planet that moves is the moon. And people will pay particular attention to the moon shifting signs and things like that in a secondary progression chart. And that has a lot to do, the moon has a lot to do with your emotions, your body, things like that. A lot of people will look at that for health reasons. And a solar arc tends to show events, show events that manifest within the life. And especially we're looking at squares and oppositions as points, pivotal points in the life. So in this case, we have the solar arc chart where we have solar arc Pluto here at 17 degrees, 39 minutes, square that natal Mars in detriment within a 47-minute orb, less than a degree. So that's already a bit ominous when you see Mars and Pluto together, which can be very violent in that sense. And then you have, along with that Mars-Pluto connection between solar arc and natal Mars, then you have solar arc Mars conjunct natal Pluto. So you have 2 degrees 49 Cancer here, and you've got 3 degrees 15 minutes of Pluto there. So that's a 27-minute orb, very tight. Between those planets. So we really have a real Mars-Pluto signification here, or signature for this assassination. The other thing I'd point out was that his strong planets in declination were Sun and Saturn, And when we look at the midpoint between them, that's where Mars sits also. And that can affect the chart in a variety of ways. I tend to look at this as a weakening point since Mars is in fall in Cancer. So, if he was a Sun Saturn Samson, then you've got Delilah coming in and cutting the hair off. It's kind of how I'm looking at it. Then finally, you have a solar arc Uranus here at 8 Aries, squaring that Pluto at 316. And then, of course, because it's involved with this solar arc Mars, that's all activating this particular configuration as well. So quite an ominous chart for JFK. So I have another example, and this is JFK's brother, Robert F. Kennedy. And I want to take you through some of the same comparisons and see what we come up with. So another birth time from memory. His is a little tighter in what you might think is real because it's at an odd time of 3:11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but we don't know for sure. So the first thing we want to do is check the declinations of his birth chart. And in this case, he was born also in Brookline, Massachusetts. And we have Pluto strong there at 20 north 52 degrees. It is in a multiple of 2 to the latitude there. So Pluto is powerful there, and it's also parallel with the moon. So the moon is at 20 south 35. Pluto is 20 north 52, so it's actually contraparallel. So it's like an opposition. His Pluto and moon are like in opposition with each other, and his moon is already in detriment in Capricorn because moon rules Cancer, which is the opposite sign of Capricorn. Moon loves to be in Cancer, doesn't want to be in Capricorn. So we got this moon-Pluto opposition thing going on, and that probably could have a lot to do with his family environment, really, since the moon has a lot to do with the family. The Pluto, they've got a lot of plutocrats in that family with his father, Joseph Kennedy, and a lot of intensity around that thing. And then he's got a very powerful Uranus. So here is another interesting tidbit when dealing with declination here. If that planet is at a small degree, let's say this was at 1 degree, 1 degree of declination, it's going to work no matter what the multiplier is. 1 times 42, it's going to be 42 degrees. So the lower it is here, the more likely it's going to be within a declination match to the latitude, be it where you live or where you move. So in this case, Uranus at 10 times is 40 degrees, and it's still within a orb of 1 degree and 50 minutes to the latitude. So that's what happens there. So now what happens when we move to Los Angeles? This is where he was assassinated on this April 4th, April 5th, 1968. We'll see that on the next chart. The relocated latitude now is 34 north, 3 or 4 minutes. And the Uranus multiple changes to 8 times. Prior to that, we had Uranus at, I think it was, let me see, where's Uranus here? Yeah, it was at 10 times. So now it's 8 times. So 8 times 4 is 32, and 3 times 4 is 12. So you have it at about 3312. So it is now still within its multiple, still strong in the chart. Now, his essential dignity, it always remains the same. We have that. We have also Jupiter in fall in Capricorn. Jupiter's exaltation is in Cancer. I should have mentioned that before. We have Mercury in detriment as well in Sagittarius because it rules Gemini. So it's in its opposite sign of Sagittarius. And we talked about the moon in detriment. So that doesn't change, based on moving to Los Angeles or being relocated in Los Angeles. In this particular situation. His Mars is also dignified, by the way. I don't think we mentioned that. Mars in Scorpio is at home in Scorpio. So it stays strong there. So now let's look at the... All right, now we're looking at the transit chart for Robert F. Kennedy on the day he was assassinated, which was June 5th, 1968, around midnight in the Ambassador Hotel. So this transit chart, we already noted the involvement of Uranus in his declinations. So we're going to focus a lot on that. The main thing that I see is this big grand cross, grand square, they call them grand cross too. That's it seems to be a signature of all three of the people that I'm looking at. But there's this square that starts with transiting Uranus, Pluto, and the Moon, all pretty close to each other in the last decan of Virgo. That is opposing natal Uranus at 21 degrees. So that's a very strong aspect there. A lot of people in their lives, when Uranus comes to oppose Uranus, it's like a midlife crisis signature. Well, in this case, you have Pluto involved in the Moon and all that, so it's much more intense for Robert F. Kennedy in this particular time period. This opposition squares the Mercury, Mars, Sun, Venus opposition here. So you've got all these planets involved in this grand cross. Then, if this 311 time is accurate for his birth time, in this relocation chart in LA, it puts Pluto, Uranus, and the Moon in the 8th house. I use whole signs, but that would happen. So we don't know, though. We don't know. So the other piece of this chart is you have the transiting nodes at 15 Libra 43 for the south node, and you have the north node at 1543 Aries. Both of the nodal axis, which is always opposite each other, is squaring Pluto. Again, we have this involvement of death in the chart. And Pluto squaring the nodes, could be very much suggesting an interruption in the life progress, as typically people in evolutionary astrology talk about how we drive towards our north node, we let go of our south node, and here you have Pluto coming in and opposing that. So that's his transit chart. All right, now we're looking at RFK's solar arc chart. A little busy, so we'll walk through it here and make sense of all these lines that I've drawn in. The first major aspect we have is this T-square that is formed by Uranus at 4 degrees Taurus, 50 minutes, opposing Mars at 4 degrees Scorpio, 50 minutes. This is exact. This is a partile aspect. There's exact to the minute. So this is very powerful, Uranus-Mars. And it's square Mercury, and if the birth time is accurate at 311, that would be his natal first house and his natal ascendant, a dispositor of the natal ascendant. So there is a chance that this is what the chart looks like. It would certainly be a dispositor of the natal ascendant, as the ascendant is in the middle of Gemini. So I'm pretty confident that's a big deal in terms of the person, the body, that type of thing. Then we have solar arc Pluto at 27 degrees Leo, squaring the Sun at 28 degrees Scorpio. So there you have Pluto coming in, involved in death, heavy transformation, squaring the life force, Pluto. It's also conjunct the natal Neptune, this Pluto-Neptune aspect over here. Then we have solar arc Sun conjunct natal Venus over here. And Venus, Venus is there with Jupiter and the Moon. And it's in opposition to natal Pluto. So that's why all these planets are involved here, and all the lines are being dropped. So you got natal Pluto at 14 Cancer, opposing the natal Sun at 11 Capricorn, and opposing Venus at 15 Capricorn. So the aspect's a little bit tighter with Venus. And then we have solar arc Mars. Where do we have that? Up here. Solar arc Mars is conjunct natal Mercury, which is in detriment in Sagittarius. He had just won the California primary when he was shot giving his victory speech, so heavily involved in this communication that was going on at the primary where he was assassinated. Our final example is Martin Luther King, which we can also assume it's from memory, especially 12 p.m. chart that's out there. So what we have is, in terms of essential dignity, he's got his exalted Venus in Pisces, which is very powerful. Pisces being a sign that can tap into the collective. And Moon and Pisces are there. You really feel Martin Luther King at a visceral level when he talks in his speeches. Also, Venus and the Moon are within the declinational match. So they are at 830, 829, and if you go to multiple of 4, it brings them up to 33. So they're very, very emphasized here in this chart. Jupiter is also there at a multiple of 3 at 1049. And Neptune is there. It's strengthened at a multiple of 3, Neptune at 1143. You can see down here all these parallels. You've got the Moon and Venus parallel, Jupiter and Neptune parallel. So that's all very strong. And then, of course, with Uranus, it's only at 1 degree north, and so basically it's going to be strong no matter where he is, no matter birthplace, on the road, wherever it is that he wants to go, it's going to be strong there. Now let's look at his Memphis chart. Relocated to Memphis, where he was assassinated in April. I believe it's April. We'll look at the next chart in 1968. Similar to Bobby Kennedy. So the relocation brings the latitude not very much different than Georgia, Atlanta. It's up 35 degrees north instead of the 33 we saw. But the tightest orb there is Neptune. When we look at Neptune at a multiple of 3, it's within 6 minutes of the latitude. So Neptune is extremely powerful there. Moon and Venus, they're barely within the orb of the 2 degrees, so they're not as strong in Memphis as they were in Atlanta. Jupiter is no longer an orb of the latitude at all. And of course, Uranus is still strong. Looking at Martin Luther King's transit chart for April 4th, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee, we see that Neptune, which is a big planet in his chart, is in a conjunction with the nodes, south node opposing the north node, and the nodal axis is squared by transiting Jupiter. So we have Jupiter interrupting this life flow from an expansive standpoint. And I tend to look at this Grand Cross he also has in here in this chart is almost somewhat like a martyr signature. You've got this big cross and you've got this T-cross with Jupiter at the axis. But in this Grand Cross, you have Uranus and Pluto. We know how strong Uranus is with Pluto, which is all this transformation that Pluto is known with and at times death, opposing transiting Venus and Mercury. So it's really created this big T-square because his natal Mars and Saturn opposition is part of all this. So this Grand Cross and this T-square seem to give a view of what was going on with him on that particular day. Moving to the solar arc chart, we see that solar arc Pluto is conjunct natal Neptune. It's within 3 degrees. And that is also in a T-square with the nodes. So you've got the north node and the south node here in a T-square with Pluto coming in and disrupting the nodal axis like we've talked about from a Pluto transformational standpoint. And, you got to sometimes think about these figures that are deeply embedded in our collective, that when we see transits that look like personal transits in the chart, a lot of times they're signifying what's going on in the collective. And that's certainly, I think, the case with Martin Luther King and JFK and RFK. So then we have solar arc Neptune, and it is in opposition to his natal Uranus. It's a little bit of a wider orb. You've got Uranus at 3 Aries, and you've got Neptune at 10 Libra, but it is still in opposition, and it's still activated by other things that are going on. And then you look at solar arc Uranus here, and that is squaring his natal Mercury. So you got 13 Taurus 41, and then that comes up to 11 Aquarius 45. So that's happening. And Uranus and Mercury, you would think that there's something going on with communication, with speech. And I want to take a look at that in a minute. Then we have his solar arc Saturn. Where are you, Saturn? Up here. And that is in square to Chiron, his natal Chiron. So you get 5 Aquarius down to natal Chiron, which is 5 Taurus. And Chiron has a lot to do, it's known as the wounded healer. And in a sense, that's kind of an archetype he represents there as well, is this healing force in our collective happening on that particular day as a result of the assassination. And it's also squaring in a kind of a wide square with Uranus. So each of these folks, I think, kind of illustrate how the declinations work in a relocation perspective. I'll end this presentation talking about declination signatures, which I made that up. But basically what I'm trying to say is each of these charts has a declination signature, in that these planets are the most emphasized in their natal charts, some in their relocation charts, but most of the natal charts. The natal charts don't change. The relocation charts will put other planets in declination and take other planets out of declination, which will affect how those planets are expressed via their dignities that we're showing here. So I want to talk first about John Fitzgerald Kennedy with his Sun Saturn declination. Sun Saturn to me means hard work. And he certainly demonstrated hard work. Even though he was born in a house of privilege, his father, Joseph Kennedy Sr., made his fortune as a bootlegger. And he decided he wanted his oldest son to become president of the United States. That was Joseph Kennedy Jr. And he had put all his hopes and aspirations on Joseph, and Joseph was killed in World War II. He was a pilot, and he was killed. And basically, it was handed over to John. John wasn't planning on becoming president of the United States, but his father was so adamant about it that he basically made him become president of the United States. So he took that role, even though he had back problems, health problems, all kinds of problems. But he did do that, and he became a senator, and then he ran for office for president of the United States in 1960. When he was elected, his inauguration address, he made a famous speech and a famous call to the youth of the country. And he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." This was a call to doing hard work. And most of the young people in our country at that time, the baby boomers, we were used to affluent times. There wasn't a lot that, at least in the mainstream, that we worried about in terms of our economics and things like that. So it was a time where folks really wanted to take a part in the government and in improving things in America. And one other challenge that he issued at that time was that he wanted to put a man on the moon before the end of the decade. And this was something we actually did accomplish in 1969. So hard work for JFK, I think, works for him very well. Robert F. Kennedy was known, at least when he was running for president in 1968, for wanting to bring about economic justice and really try to end poverty that he observed in the South when he went down there, and he talked to a lot of poor white Americans, poor black Americans, poor Hispanic Americans, people down there that could hardly afford enough to eat or to have any decent kind of health care. And he made a speech in South Africa during apartheid, which was really actually pretty relevant to what was going on in America. And it was called A Tiny Ripple of Hope speech. And it's actually much, much longer than I can talk about here. You can find it on YouTube. And he said, each time a man stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. And he uses a pond where you throw the stone in as an analogy of this. And then Martin Luther King has that Uranian qualities of reform and revolution, but he was looking for justice for the races, especially between black and white Americans, where he had visions of one day black and white children holding hands and walking to school together. So he was also quite a visionary in setting up a vision, an ideal vision for what the country would be like if we could get past the racism that was deeply, deeply embedded into this country. So I'm going to close with his speech that was given the night before in Memphis when he was talking to the garbage workers that were there, the union. That's what brought him to Memphis in the first place. And he gave this speech that was really, really prescient. So I'll close with that. Thank you very much.
I don't know what will happen. I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of